Welcome to this session. I'm so glad you've joined me for this session. In this session, we will rethink church. So put up your feet and relax and put down your traditions. Put down the things that you have learned through a man-made system. Put down your cultural expectations and join me on a journey to discovering and rethinking of things we thought we knew about the Bible and Christianity. This is Rethinking Church and everything that goes on with it. And here we go, session 1, Rethinking Church. Almost every Christian I know would rightly claim that the church is the people and not the building. Yet practically we still refer to the building as a church. We say things like, here is the address for our church. Or we refer to the church as an event when we say church starts at 10 a.m. Actually, if you tell someone you are a Christian, the next question that they often ask is, what church do you go to? It is assumed that as a Christian you will go to some premises at a particular time, and we refer to that as church. But what relevance is the question, where do you go to church, to our Christianity? Because surely our Christianity is not based on the fact that we go to church. But this shows how much our cultural understanding and paradigm of church is very different to the original paradigm of church. And it's also different to what Jesus originally intended when he declared, I will build my church. Now, if we're going to rethink church, the first thing we need to understand is that the English word church is not in the actual original scriptures. Now I know some of you may be thinking, what about Matthew chapter 16 verse 18? And what about in the book of Revelation, where there are 7 letters to the angels of the church? But the original scriptures were never written in English. So we need to look at the original word that has been translated to the English word church in the scriptures. And that original word is the Greek word ekklesia. Now the basic meaning of the Greek word ekklesia is assembly or gathering. It was a very common word back in the days of Jesus, and the Greeks used it to refer to the citizens of a city gathering to decide on political issues. And then later it was picked up and referred to an assembly or the devotees of a god. So in Matthew chapter 16 verse 18, Jesus uses a very common word when he says, I will build my church. A word that people would have clearly understood as it was used to describe all sorts of gatherings. We find that word used in Acts chapter 9:39, and it's not referring to what we would consider church today. It's referring to a judicial, lawful gathering. Acts 19:39 says, but if you want anything beyond this, it shall be settled in the lawful assembly. That word assembly, ekklesia. Now most often when ekklesia is used in the New Testament, it is translated church. Jesus never said, I will build my church, but rather, I will build my ekklesia. And what he is saying is that he was and is going to have his own gathering of people, of followers, of disciples. And this is why the church is not a building and it's not an event, but it's a gathering of a congregation of people. So phrases like, what time does church start? Or where do you go to church? Only makes sense if the church is an event or a building. But if we see the church as the ekklesia, then those phrases make no sense at all. What time does gathering start? Or what time does congregation start? Or where do you go to gathering? Or where do you go to congregation? And this is why we need to rethink church. We need to rethink and redefine what it is. We have been programmed by our culture and our society with a wrong view of church. So when we say the word church, we think of a building or an event. Now some would say, but we all know the church is the people. Yet in our English language, when we say the word church, we think of a building or an event. And maybe today that is exactly what the church is. Maybe today the church is a building or an event. But if that is the case, it is not what the Bible speaks about, nor does it resemble anything like what Jesus said he would build. So the original word ecclesia that was translated church in the New Testament was not a service, nor was it a building. It wasn't a staged event, nor was it an entertainment event for spectators. Rather, it is a local community of people who serve God and each other through ministry one to another for the mutual building up of all with Christ as the head. So the common question often asked of a Christian being, where do you go to church, is irrelevant to being a Christian. The question assumes that because you are a Christian, that you go to church. Yet we should know that Christianity is not determined by our church attendance, nor is going to church essential for Christians. Now some may quote Hebrews chapter 10 verse 25 and say that we need to go to church because Hebrews 10:25 says, do not forsake the gathering. But the word ecclesia, which is translated church in the New Testament, is not mentioned at all in Hebrews chapter 10 verse 25. And Hebrews chapter 10 verse 25 isn't even talking about church attendance. What is important for a Christian is not going to church, but it is to be a part of Christ's ecclesia. And this provides genuine connection and fellowship with other believers, where each person can be encouraged, equipped, accountable, and corrected when needed. And this fulfills the scripture in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25. And some would say that's the exact reason we go to church, is to be encouraged, equipped, accountable, and corrected when needed. Yet many churches today simply provide an entertainment service or a religious fulfillment service which doesn't fulfill the purpose of Christ's ecclesia. So after rethinking church, where to from here? I think we need to stop assuming that because someone goes to church that they are a Christian, and that someone that doesn't go to church is not a Christian. Let's not pass judgment on people because of their church attendance or their non-attendance. Let's understand that what Jesus promoted was not going to church, but rather having genuine fellowship and gathering with other believers. The structure and paradigm of these gatherings may differ to what we consider to be normal for church, but that doesn't make it any less significant than a church service. Actually, they may be more beneficial than a church service. So, should we stop going to church? Well, not necessarily. But you should be honest about why you go and what you do at church. And if you're simply going out of tradition, fear, or obligation, then maybe you should stop and start seeking the genuine, authentic type of gathering that Jesus promoted. The common reasons people go to church is for things like corporate worship, yet music and song is not worship. Things like communion and the sacraments, yet originally they were served as a meal at gatherings in people's houses. Things like to pay your tithes or offerings, to hear the sermon, the word of the Lord. Now in this session we have rethought church, and coming up we will rethink worship, communion, tithes, offerings, the sermon, and more. Stay tuned for that. But for now, in summarising our Rethink a Church session today, I would say that church, as we know it today, is not the ecclesia spoken about in the Bible.